Hello there, coming to you from the bunker. This is episode 43 of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. I'm not sure how, but it seems we've made it all the way to the end of 2020, a year that has ups and downs, but mostly the latter. In keeping with tradition, I've assembled a panel of the usual suspects to help me make sense of the last 12 months and pick out some of the most noteworthy events in the world of Watchtower. Joining me for today's show is Mark O'Donnell, Javier Ortiz, and Kim Silvio. Mark, Kim, and Javi, thank you so much for joining me.
Morning.
And Scrappy.
We have Scrappy. We have all manner of Australian wildlife as well, making its presence known. But we're grateful for it because it's nice to be reminded that we're alive despite everything that the year has thrown at us.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, we're so Watchtower focused that we'll get into this later.
Boom!
Yes, breaking news there. It's and we're going to talk about some good things, but there's a lot, as you said, Lloyd. It's primarily a lot of sad things that have happened in 2020, and of course, we are, very sympathetic to the victims of the virus that have really plagued. Our worldwide. It's affected every nation. And we've just learned, I think, from the latest JW broadcasting update that over 7,500 Jehovah's Witnesses have died of the coronavirus. And that's pretty significant for an 8 million worldwide number. So we are sympathetic to that. And I know that they are taking steps to try to thwart the virus. In fact, we just got some elders' letters just came in hot off the press. I'll get to later. But hope everyone's doing well. I know there's been a lot of suffering and depression, and we're in that seasonal depression time right now. So hopefully we can bring a little cheer.
We have an interesting show lined up. We've done our best to rack our brains and figure out what were the main talking points from a JW perspective. What's the audience in for, Javier? Do we have perhaps some news items that people had forgotten happened in 2020?
Yeah, I think, we're going to go all the way back starting January and cover it month through month. And some of this stuff, I completely, it's been a whirlwind year, so I completely forgot. It kind of fell off on my radar. And we'll get to talk about it today, so that's cool. And before we get into it, I just want everyone to know, I think we did this last year, and I'd like to continue the tradition of ending it with a toast. So I want everybody to get their favorite drink towards the end of the show, and we'll all toast together.
Hang on a minute. I actually have a walkie-talkie in the bunker now. Deanna, are you there?
Calling McAllen.
Is there any chance that you can bring me down a little bit of whiskey? And if it's the new whiskey, can you bring it with a little bit of water as well, because it's really strong?
Is the show over?
No, you're live on air.
Me talking?
You talking, yeah.
Okay. Can you take whiskey outside from me?
Yeah, I'll grab it from the door. Thank you so much. See you in a bit. Sorry about that. I hadn't anticipated that, so otherwise we would have planned. That was a Christmas present, by the way. I'm really pleased with it. And Kim, you will be casting a lawyer's view or a retired lawyer's view on some of the legal proceedings.
Yes, it's been a big year in legal terms, hasn't it? Like with Montana and Dark Spilver. That's almost like when I thought about it, I thought, no, Dark Spilver was last year, but that was this year. Not to mention the Australian redress and all of the legislation changes in Australia. It's been a massive year, huge.
Indeed.
Yeah, I was looking it over before. We were talking a little bit about the program yesterday, and I realized that in 2020 we've had 12 episodes of Watchtower in Focus this year. nearly one a month. This will make 13, so technically more than one per month. It just kind of shows you how many events, big events, have happened in Watchtower world. And these are significant events. These are not just, we just don't cover the little things, but we really try to cover the things that have a significant impact upon not only witnesses, but anyone affected by them. So, well done to the team for sticking with us, and for everybody that's watching. Thank you for that.
One of the people watching is Lisa Burberry, and Lisa has sent through a very generous super chat. Thank you so much, Lisa. Obviously, the Watchtower in Focus shows very rarely get full monetization because we handle some stuff that YouTube, frankly, doesn't want us to make videos about. So thank you so much for that. Now, let's get stuck in. January of 2020, there was a very interesting story in the state of Montana, which, Mark, you're going to take us through.
Yeah, so let me jump back to my notes here. Thank you for that, Lloyd. And so, as many of you know from watching previous Watchtower in Focus episodes, in the year 2018, there was a trial, the Nunez trial, in which Watchtower was penalized by the amount of $35 million, $4 million for negligence and $31 million for their malice in connection with not reporting child abuse. So in that case, Watchtower's headquarters intentionally told the Montana elders not to report the abuse of Lexi Nunez as well as her aunt. And those elders complied with Watchtower. They did not report it. As a result, Lexi's abuse continued. And I mean, this is abuse that continued both before, during, and after the time that her perpetrator of abuse was disfellowshipped for abusing her. So it continued even after he was reinstated to the congregation. So really just a bizarre and horrible set of events. And, the judge ruled against Watchtower in 2018. The jury ruled against Watchtower in 2018. Everyone was in agreement that what was done was wrong. It was in violation of the law, and it was just egregious, malicious conduct. It wasn't just a $4 million negligence claim, which is around the amount that a lot of these cases settle for. But they added malice into that. And after examining the facts, this was a unanimous jury came to that decision, and the judge affirmed that decision. So Watchtower appeals. I went back to Montana in 2019 for the appeal hearing, which was held in Billings, Montana. And they took a few months to deliberate. And in January, as you mentioned, of last year, the Montana Supreme Court overturned the decision. And let's see what notes I have here for that, because I just want to read you very briefly what happened there so everyone understands, for those not familiar. So the reversal of the 2018 ruling was not a dispute of the facts of the case, but it was an acknowledgement that Jehovah's Witnesses had intentionally availed themselves of a legal loophole when they advised the Thompson Falls elders not to report the abuse of Lexi to the authorities. So this is a small piece. It really sums up what the Supreme Court said. This is a quote. It says, "The undisputed material facts in the record show that Jehovah's Witness canon law, church doctrine, or established church practice required that the reports of abuse in this case be kept confidential." So, this is a really, really interesting ruling, because the Supreme Court of Montana, not the United States, of Montana, they felt that their hands were tied in that the way that the law is written, you have mandatory child abuse reporting. That's absolutely mandatory for clergy, for teachers, for anyone who is a mandatory reporter, which is basically everyone, but especially clergy. So within the exceptions to that law is a little piece of verbiage, just a little piece of verbiage that cost this case $35 million. It cost the plaintiff that much money. The little piece says that if it's within the established church practice, then the priest, the elder, whoever is exempt from reporting. Now, that really completely defeats the purpose of the law. The purpose is to make those people accountable for reporting child abuse to the authorities so that these individuals are not subject to ongoing abuse, which is what happened, exactly what happened. And yet that little piece of law says that, well, because you're a church and you have an established church practice, whatever you say that established church practice is, then that basically forms the exception to the law. So if Jehovah's Witnesses say, hey, it's our established church practice to keep it confidential and not call the police, the Montana Supreme Court is saying our hands are tied. We have to rule this way. So that's exactly what happened. So the good news is that the case is not over, because the case never got fully adjudicated on the negligence charge. So essentially, it's gone all the way back to September of 2018, where now they have re-argued the case of negligence. Because here's what's interesting. What's interesting is that even though they technically abided by the law, there is still an argument to be made that their negligence, the elders' negligence, caused harm to Lexi Nunez as well as her aunt, but particularly to Lexi. So this is effectively kind of like a Good Samaritan law, where if you see someone being robbed and you had the power to do something about it and you did nothing, and that person got robbed, injured, killed, cut with a knife, whatever, then you have a degree of responsibility. So that's what's being adjudicated now. Despite the law, we're throwing out the law, going back to negligence, saying Watchtower had a responsibility to this victim, and it is negligent what they did. So I know all this is very complicated, but that's where it is. And so now the arguments have been made this year again on the basis of negligent failure to report causing intentional harm to this victim. And so the Supreme Court now is sitting on yet another decision where they will decide whether or not to allow this case to proceed. So that's what happened in January, and I thought, it would be helpful to everybody to know what's going on.
And thank you for bringing us up to date with what is going on, because at the time, I can remember us covering it here on the show. It was a hammer blow. Not just to all of us who want to see justice against the organization, but particularly for the victims. They received an award at this appeal hearing, and on the other hand had to witness their case getting denied, or whatever the legal phraseology is. But it's heartening to know that the fight still carries on, and even though Watchtower's lawyers have found a loophole, so have Lexi's lawyers found a loophole.
Indeed. So we're really looking forward to how this is going to proceed. And we'll talk later about how other cases, Montana is just one state. So I want to emphasize that we're only dealing with one state in the U.S. Not all cases are handled this way. And for the record, a former Montana Supreme Court judge spoke out very vocally against the decision made by the Montana Supreme Court. We'd love to have him on the show sometime if we can get hold of him, but he wrote an article about it. So we do have opposing views, but unfortunately at the time the Supreme Court decision, their views were in alignment, that their hands were tied. And look, they do feel badly for what happened to the victim, but we have to understand that even the Supreme Court of the United States, we know that decisions are being made, let's say against the president in his bid for what's going on with the election. Well, even though the Supreme Court justices, 3 of them were appointed by our president in the U.S., it doesn't mean they're going to vote in favor of what his case is or what his attorney's case is. So it's the same way with these cases that reached Montana Supreme Court, and maybe we'll talk about Utah later, but that's another subject.
Maybe
Mark, do we know when we can expect an update on that one in 2021?
So we don't. It's very similar. I'll give you an example. So we went to the Montana Supreme Court hearing in Billings, Montana. I believe it was October. Yeah, it was October of 2019. We didn't hear until January. So it's already been, I think, about the same amount of time, maybe a little bit more, since both sides have argued their case to the Supreme Court. The answer, though, Javier, is I hope it's soon, but I check it weekly or daily. So as soon as we know, we'll have an answer.
Is Mark's...
Mark, I just had a...
sorry, is Mark's audio okay for everyone else, or is it just me?
I can hear...
Are you getting an echo?
I can hear him. There's a little bit of feedback. Like
Okay.
I can hear like an echo.
It's just gone a little bit blurry for me, but I can still hear every word, Mark. Sorry, go on, Kim.
I'll check.
No, I was just going to ask Mark, in terms of the whole, process, and, if that's their process, that's, then confidentiality, it's an exception. In Australia, they've, clearly come out and said it's not up to the organisation to tell people how, not up to the organisation to tell them what the law will be. It's up to the law to tell the organisation how it's going to be. Is there any of that sort of attitude as well in the United States with this Montana case, the Nunez case? Because to me, they're basically telling the government what the law or how the law is going to be. So anything you can say about that?
And that does come into play in other cases. And, I perhaps what I'll do is try to think of some examples of that and bring them into the program later. But you are absolutely right. Watchtower does tend to try to tell the court what the law is and how to interpret the law. But really, that's what all, if you're a litigator, this is what your job is to present your side of the argument and all. Okay, so it sounds like my audio is cleared up. We're getting a message. Okay. Yeah. So, nothing has changed here. So I'm not sure. Maybe it was an internet issue. But Kim, to your point, I'll try to find some examples. But it's not. Look, it works that way on both sides, where the ultimate authority is the judicial system, and they rule on the law. So, like here in civil cases, when you go to trial, whether it's criminal or civil, the judge usually reads a statement at the beginning about how the legal process works and how they have to judge. They usually say something like, I, the judge, am the sole arbiter of the law in this case. And I, will, the jury will make the decision, if there's a jury, on how the facts of the case, whether the facts are true or not true. But the judge is the sole arbiter of the legal process. The judge will decide whether or not, for example, a Jehovah's Witness church elder is allowed to refuse to testify. And we're going to talk about that later, because this happens all the time. Elders refuse to testify. So, there's some things that ultimately the judges have to look at the law, and they're charged with being completely neutral. And I know they're not always neutral, but generally speaking, the justice system does work. And regardless of what the attorneys tell them, the judges have to be independent and fair as arbiters and decision makers on the law. I hope that makes sense. You know that.
What we'll do now is just rattle through. We need to get through this list. Just one word. I did get my whiskey delivered, so thank you very much indeed, Deanna, if you're watching. I do also need to thank a number of very generous super chats. Wow. Thank you so much. True Review, who says, thank you for freeing lives and thank you for not letting up on the work. Nicole Mort Parker with a massive super chat. Cheers. Happy New Year. Here's to you all. Cindy Arnold sent through a super chat, as did Like a Fox, otherwise known as Amanda, friend of the show. Arliss Scott says, Happy New Year and thanks so much for all you do. Tony Morris sent through a super chat, probably easing his conscience there. And It's Me sent through a super chat saying, let's make our voices heard. Keep up the good fight. Thank you guys for all you do. So thank you so much to those very kind super chats. Now, though, still in January, it was an interesting month. Utrecht University released its report, but it was after quite some resistance, which Javier is going to tell us about.
Yeah, so the skinny on that one is that back in January, I believe it was the 23rd, Utrecht University in the Netherlands released their report. It was research into sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witness community in the Netherlands. And to no surprise for anyone, Watchtower submitted a court application to stop the release of the report, saying that the church that the article said the church described the university findings as incorrect, slanderous, and extremely insulting. Publication will cause untold damage to the community and may also be discriminatory, it claimed. So if we all remember, I believe it was in January 2019, it was announced that Utrecht University would be conducting this research, and they engaged the Jehovah's Witnesses in the Netherlands. And at first it seemed like they were cooperative and they were telling Jehovah's Witnesses to participate in the study. But then when the tallies came in and the numbers were out, and it was reported that most victims were unhappy with the way their complaints were handled by Jehovah's Witnesses in the Netherlands, Watchtower tried to stop the publication of the study. Fortunately, they were able to push this through the courts and release the study, which we can download on the website. But yeah, this was a big win for the research, and it was a big win for the community, because now we have university-backed research as to how Jehovah's Witnesses feel their concerns are handled regarding child sexual abuse.
And am I correct, Javier, in saying that Jehovah's Witnesses were fully in agreement with that report and loved it?
Yeah, sure. If you believe that, I have a bridge in London.
We had the backlash, right? So
Well,
we had the backlash from that.
The interesting thing, of course, is that initially, I mean, we have the letter. Jehovah's Witnesses in the Netherlands encouraged congregations to participate and cooperate with the report. So they were encouraged. They literally were sending a letter out to all the congregations saying, please cooperate with this report, hoping, we would think, that by getting as many believing witnesses to be involved as possible, they would come through the report with flying colours. When that didn't happen, they tried to get the report crushed and tried to get it, tried to stop its publication, which is as disingenuous as you can possibly get, because on the one hand, they're saying to witnesses in the Netherlands, we want you to speak out, we want you to share your experiences. And then when they don't like the results, they want to silence those voices and silence the voices of their own congregants.
It's a bit risky a move, don't you think?
I think it was a classic situation of a catch-22 for them, right? Because how would it have looked for PR reasons if they discouraged Jehovah's Witnesses in the Netherlands from participating in this, and then with the same bold-faced claim that they care about protecting children, that they care about protecting abuse survivors, if they don't, tell their followers to cooperate with the study. But it's. I think, and I'm not sure of the details, but I believe that there were anonymous participants that were no longer Jehovah's Witnesses that partook in the research study, and I think that was their biggest beef about it, was that it wasn't solely active current Jehovah's Witnesses, that it included people who were no longer members of the religion. And I think that was their biggest gripe.
They didn't like that you could participate anonymously online. Effectively meaning that almost anyone could get involved, whether they'd had involvement in the organisation or not. But that's the risk you run when you have an online survey. And realistically, in the 21st century, if you're going to do an investigation, you need an online survey. But what we learned from the report was that they actually conducted in-person interviews, and the in-person interviews were saying pretty much the same thing as the data that was revealed from the online survey. So you simply can't say, oh well, the whole thing was rigged, when the actual people that the interviewers were speaking to were saying the same thing.
Where have I heard that tactic, where the news are fake and the polls are rigged? Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and I think that one of the interesting things that came out of it is that the organization sought out a group to defend them. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was in the Utrecht case, that they sought out a group of individuals who are well known for defending cult-like religious groups like Om Shinrikyo and other controversial cult groups, headed by this Italian man named Massimo Intravine. And I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly.
CESNA, the Center for Studies on New Religions, based in Turin. And before you proceed further, I am considering going to Turin to see if I can secure some kind of interview with the people behind this organization. But yeah, go on.
Well, that's really it. Yeah, and I know you want to see the shroud as well.
Obviously, yeah.
Of course. But no, it is interesting that it's not the first time Watchtower has kind of grasped this group, this Cessna, and because, you know, obviously they are very opposed to the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, as are we. We certainly don't want to see freedom of speech and religion violated. We work on this at a much deeper level, where we don't want organizations to really control the minds and lives and the blood policy that is so damaging to witnesses and the child abuse policy, but we don't want to see individual witnesses persecuted. So in that sense, we agree with Mr. Massimo, but what we certainly do not agree with is the way that they handle child sexual abuse allegations. And so they're effectively being defended by a group that really doesn't have a whole lot of global respect. And I feel like that's sort of a last-ditch effort for Jehovah's Witnesses. Who else are they going to turn to? Because the law and the authorities are really behind our viewpoint, our agreement with the civil authorities and how they handle, in this case, child sexual abuse allegations. So
indeed,
it's very interesting who they've turned to.
Let's move on to February. We need to pick up the pace because we're over 25 minutes in and we've still got 11 months to go. But anyway, February, what happened in February? According to my notes, we had a 2-part documentary released on the weekend of February the 8th that left quite a sizable mark in terms of reporting on child sex abuse mishandling among Jehovah's Witnesses. Javier, what happened there?
Yeah, so this was the much-awaited documentary by a good friend, Trey Bundy, and his news organization, Reveal News. It was called The Witnesses, and it aired on the Oxygen channel here in the States. It's available for streaming now on the Oxygen website. And it featured some familiar faces, people that we've spoken to. Debbie McDaniel was featured on the show. Chessa Mannion was also featured on the show. And I think I was on the Watchtower in Focus episode where we discussed this series, this 2-part series, which I believe that it set the bar. I mean, there have been some, Leah Remini's work was great on this subject and others, but I believe this one set the bar for the kind of in-depth investigative journalism on the sexual abuse issues within Watchtower. This definitely set the bar. Trey did a wonderful job. So my hats are off to him. And it was great. It had a tremendous impact. It was received positively in the XJW forums. I also like to point out that it features our good friend Lloyd Evans, who wore a remarkable amount of makeup in his interviews.
No, that was the aftermath. They did not put as much makeup on me. That one thing I will say about Trey Bundy, not only is he a top-notch journalist, but he also doesn't make you wear as much makeup as Leah makes you wear.
Listen, I noticed that you didn't have any blemish marks on your skin, and I wondered if you were using apricot scrub at the time, but I don't know. But yeah, it was
asking all the hard questions on Watchtower in Focus, as our viewers expect.
Well, for the record, Javier is sponsored by a wonderful company. I don't know if you have the poster nearby, but maybe before the end of the program, you can show a big event that happened in 2020.
Anyway,
I will but yes, it was again. It set the bar. I thought it was great work done by Trey Bundy, and it happened in 2020, and we forget that it did. But, that was February.
It was a highlight, wasn't it? Really, of an otherwise bleak year. Also in February, we had Jan Kraft, a Swedish JW elder, losing his appeal after he was fined thousands of dollars for showing Watchtower's videos at a 2018 convention. And we had a couple of Swedish activists on the channel for episode 33, which we titled The Jan Kraft Case. If you're interested, please do look it up. This story, I feel, has taken on a bit of added weight given some of the most recent material put out by the organisation, where the organisation is essentially being unapologetic and doubling down on its right to indoctrinate children at conventions using material that's violent. Stephen Lett lectured parents in the May 2020 broadcast, and Tony Morris doubled down on that stance in the December 2020 broadcast. So quite an astonishing that there's basically been not just a legal backlash, not just a backlash from ex-Jehovah's Witness activists, but also even a backlash from believing Jehovah's Witness parents who've written in to the headquarters in such numbers that they've had to address this issue on 2 JW Broadcasting episodes.
Yeah, I'm curious about this one, because now that the conventions are probably going to be streamed, or they were streamed last year, right? And they're probably, I don't know if they've announced that they're going to be streamed in 2021, but in Sweden, are they going to be able to fine the elders for showing these videos at all, or if it's online?
Well, we're going to find out whether they are able to edit. Right now, the announcement has been they have no in-person conventions scheduled for 2021.
Oh, it will be the same thing in 2021. They'll do the same, presumably over June, July, August, or whatever it was, or July and August. They'll have the video conventions. But yeah, the thing is with conventions, I mean, arguably to at least some degree, there's a bit of parental discretion when it comes to the JW Broadcasting episodes, because parents can say, well, the Caleb and Sophia cartoons, those are for the kids, we get to decide what we show them from the monthly broadcast. But when it comes to conventions, those are compulsory viewing for the whole family, and they have propaganda in there that's been green lighted by a teaching committee that doesn't have any experience at all with raising children. So they're just waving through anything that supports their narrative, irrespective of whether it's age appropriate.
I just have to say that this really demonstrates the power of indoctrination and how it's so easy to let this wash over you as a child and to become desensitized to it. Because I had the My Book of Bible Stories. We didn't have the many videos back when I was growing up, but we had these books and they had some very violent imagery, and that was kind of layered over top of everything else I was learning. We had tent pins going through the brain of, enemy soldiers, depictions of killing 185,000 soldiers and having them lay across the fields, and just various Bible stories that are very violent. So I remember being desensitized to it to the point where I saw it so much that, now that when I see others' reactions to these things, I realize, my God, we really were desensitized to that. And, it's sort of a lesson learned that children should not be exposed to these things.
Indeed. Now, March was when our worlds changed, because a little thing called COVID-19 had been sweeping the world, having been first discovered obviously in China I think at the end of December 2019. And I saw a meme. It was that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail where Lancelot is running towards the castle. You'll know what I mean if you're a fan of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but it's accurate. You could kind of see it coming, and then in March was when it suddenly was there and everything changed. The world went into lockdown. The pandemic was actually officially declared by the World Health Organization on March 11th. And interestingly, on March 12th, so only a day later, at a morning worship presentation that later got broadcast, governing body helper John Ekron told the Bethel family that the coronavirus was an opportunity to, quote, practice being obedient. And that initial reaction would echo in many of the materials that the organization would subsequently release, where everything was about obedience, about following the organization's directions, because apparently the only way you can survive this pandemic is by being a believing Jehovah's Witness and following the directions of the governing body. Who knew? But on March 14th, so 3 days after the pandemic was declared, governing body Tony Morris joked before a Gilead graduation audience, "It doesn't bother me. We've been waiting for this." And in the same talk, he said, "Where's the shock?" So that was an initial reaction from Tony Morris to a pandemic that, as of now, or as of December, has claimed the lives of 7,500 Jehovah's Witnesses. And then on March 18th, a governing body 2020 update video was released, the first of a series in which Stephen Lett declared, "The events unfolding around us are making it clearer than ever that we're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days," essentially leaping on a global tragedy to push the organization's doomsday narrative. So that was when COVID-19 hit.
I got to tell you, Lloyd, I was reading those comments, and just recently I was researching something else and scanned a 1957 original Watchtower. And, Tony Morris' statements and Lett's statements are nearly identical to the things that Nathan Knorr was saying back in 1957 about how not only is the end imminent, but the destruction being wreaked upon humankind in the vile and just birds eating flesh of the decomposing bodies. It is the same language that they've been using for decade after decade, and if that doesn't wake you up to the reality that we've got problems, but it's not coming to an end. It's the same language being used by Nathan Knorr, by Joseph Rutherford, even to an extent by Charles Russell, that got people all worked up about 1914. If anyone has a newspapers.com account, I just recommend go in there, type in Nathan Knorr. You'll pull up all of these articles, newspaper articles, where Knorr talks about the condemnation of the human race and how Jehovah's Witnesses will survive into the new world. But, destruction imminent. And we could see in real time with those newspaper articles how the organization just grew and grew and grew because of this fear that people had of the imminent end of the world. And a lot of it had to do with, World War II had just happened, and you had the Cold War, and the Watchtower fed on that fear. And it just continued to the point where my parents became witnesses, your parents became witnesses, and and so forth and so on. So it's language we have heard before, and that's why we're warning people about it.
Yeah, well, Stephen Lett and Tony Morris, the Laurel and Hardy of Watchtower propaganda. I mean,
they really are, yeah.
Yeah, but it's something that was a massive trend that was going on at the time, where a lot of people were becoming fearful, that have left the organization and that they've gone back in because they were fearful of the times and what was being said and the teachings. And I don't know how many times I spoke to people and just said, look, you have the right to go back to the organization if you want, but before you do that, please do some research, because perhaps you're not as awake as you feel you are, because if that's affecting you to the point where you're going to go back, then you need to check the facts, and you need to go back and like Mark said, go back to old watchtowers. I've spoken to people that have lived through 1975, and they were there. They know what happened, and it's the same rhetoric. We just, if you don't dig deep below the surface of what the organization are telling you, you're just causing yourself mental harm. It's really important to go back and just research. And if you find that it's true, go back. Nobody's saying don't go back, just go back knowing the facts.
Indeed.
And for the record, we have birds, dogs, and cats all in one episode right now.
Yeah. Speaking of mental harm, Javier is in the midst of a thunderstorm, I think, and the dog is reacting accordingly. So Javier is just trying to manage the stress of his animal there, which is perfectly understandable.
They're scared.
But no, it's hard to understate the impact of COVID-19, and we're going to be going into the figures for the recently released 2020 service report. But obviously, for those who don't know, in case you've been living on the moon, the organisation responded by cancelling meetings in person and moving everything over to Zoom, which I welcomed here on the channel.
Yes.
I could have seen that easily going in a very different direction, but I'm very grateful that the organisation saw the need to implement those measures, even if their response otherwise has been exploitative and sensationalist. Also in March, before all of this really came to the fore, we had a case in which Judge James Donato made a ruling that upset Watchtower. And here to tell us more is Kim Silvio.
Who's going to turn their microphone back on? Sorry, everybody. I'm in central Queensland, and the cicadas.
No, there's a nice ambience there. It's making us all feel. It's making us all feel like we're on holiday, so don't worry about it.
And I'm getting bitten by mosquitoes, and flies.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that the mosquitoes can't bite us, so everything's fine. It's all right.
So in the Dark Silver case, which Mark has done extensive research for, this particular case got my craw really badly. So the short of it is that the organisation had picked up a very short article, an image, in fact. I don't know if you guys have got it, but it's to sort of describe it. It's the back page of one of the Watchtower Awake articles, and it just talks about how you can make online donations. And Dark Silver put up a picture of the back of it and sort of said, what do you think of this? Or just some really, really innocuous commentary comment. And it had been up there for some time. And he'd have posted other things as well. And obviously he's drawn the attention of Watchtower, and they issued a subpoena to Reddit to find out what, they wanted to know the name of the actual identity of Dark Silver. And he obviously didn't want to do that because I would presume he's considered PMO, so physically and mentally out. And he didn't want, obviously, the organisation to know who he was because it was going to impact his family. It would very likely end up him being disfellowshipped, not simply because, for any other reason other than the fact that he's made comments and they were obviously following some of the comments and information that he'd been providing. So they issued a subpoena to Reddit. Reddit obviously notified Dark Silver. Dark Silver appealed on the basis, made an application for quashing of the subpoena on the basis that the application would, detrimentally affect him, and that he did believe that what he was doing was in fair use under the provisions of the fair use copyright legislation. The court initially agreed and said, yes, we do agree with that. However, Watchtower were then given the opportunity to put in a rebuttal, and they objected on the basis that, in effect, the very simple short of it is the fact that by having that there, it significantly reduces their traffic to their own website, because why would you need to visit JW.org? You can get the information on Reddit, which is just ridiculous. And so anyway, the court actually held that position and ordered that his identity be given on a attorney eyes only basis. So that meant that, the Watchtower solicitors would be provided with his identity. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, had lodged an appeal on that decision, and rightfully so. It was absolutely ridiculous. And they were successful in having that that decision overturned, so that because on the basis that it's fair use, if it's fair use, there's no copyright, and therefore there is nothing that he's done wrong. He's got nothing to answer for, and therefore Watchtower don't need to have his identity. And I think it was at the beginning, in the middle, I was just shocked what was going on, but then towards the end I thought, yep, justice has been done, because he hadn't done anything wrong. And it's my opinion that it wasn't necessarily about that particular article that he put the picture up for, that image of. It was simply because they had been following him, something that he has done previously, or a multitude of different things that he's posted. They weren't happy with his commentary, and they wanted to know who he was.
Indeed. So, like you say, justice was served. We did actually cover the whole story on a Watchtower episode 34, Dark Spilver's Deliverance. And for the record, there was a lot of work done on this over on Leonard's channel. What's Leonard's channel called? I can't quite remember.
Oh,
Leonard French.
Yeah.
If you search on YouTube for Leonard French, you'll see he's a wonderful guy, YouTube lawyer, and he increasingly interested in Watchtower's copyright escapades, because copyright is his thing. So he's actually covered Dark Spilver's case more thoroughly than we have. But what a fascinating case, because really Dark Spilver the name Dark Spilver became synonymous with Watchtower's subpoena warfare strategy. In other words, their strategy of trying to silence critics by intimidating PIMO leakers of information. That's essentially all they're trying to do.
I think he's Lawful Masses.
Lawful Masses. Thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah.
So I think that pretty much takes us. There was, I've got on my notes here, Royal Commission report released. Does anyone want to take us through that, or?
We have a couple links here. They really don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there was a report released, a couple hundred pages, and one of our team members, Sherry D'Souza, had summarized a couple of the recommendations made by the Australian Royal Commission by the government. And so I'll just read those very briefly. This is their recommendations for what the Jehovah's Witnesses should do in Australia. Number one, they should abandon its application of the two-witness rule in cases involving complaints of child sexual abuse. So no more two-witness rule. Number two, the Jehovah's Witness organization should revise its policies so that women are involved in processes related to the investigating and determining of allegations of child sexual abuse. Because as we all know, women cannot hold any position of authority in the congregation. Therefore, they can't be part of any elders meetings, unless they're being interrogated themselves. But they cannot, issue any kind of directions or make any decisions related to, let's say, another female witness who was abused, and then they would therefore bring in, a female member who that person might be more comfortable talking to. It just doesn't happen with Jehovah's Witnesses. It's only men that handle these things. The third recommendation is the Jehovah's Witness organization should no longer require its members to shun those who disassociate from the organization in cases where the reason for disassociation is related to a person being a victim of child abuse. Great recommendations will never be, I don't think they'll ever be, implemented by the witnesses. And on the third note that I just read there, I'll tell you one reason why. We've seen over and over again where victims are not only subject to the two-witness rule, but they themselves often become the target of a judicial committee within the Jehovah's Witness congregation. So and it often happens with a 14-year-old. I've seen this so many times. So you have a 14-year-old, for example, any teen, 14-year-old, that is involved in sexual activity with an adult. Well, most states, most countries, would call that statutory rape or child abuse, okay? But what Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, especially if that individual is a young baptized Jehovah's Witness, is that they are responsible for their sexual contact, regardless of whether it's with another young person or whether it is with a mature adult 4 times their age. And so what we often see, such as in the Delaware case that we've talked about, is that they will disfellowship a young 14-year-old or any teen who has admitted to having sexual contact with an adult, regardless of the fact that it was child abuse, because they believe that those young people are effectively willing participants in their own abuse. The witnesses believe that children that get baptized at 8, 9, 10, 11 years old are fully competent to make decisions not to have sexual contact with an adult, whereas we all know that grooming behavior, manipulation, all of these things are factors in causing a child to end up having unwarranted sexual conduct with an adult. And it is just egregious behavior. But Watchtower believes that these children, especially once they become baptized, are responsible for that behavior, and they often disfellowship their own children because of sexual contact with an adult. So I know, if you're watching this, you might not believe it. If you don't already know about these abuse cases, you might not believe what I just told you. But this is why the Australian government has made that recommendation that you cannot shun a young child or anyone who's left the organization because of how they've been treated, as a victim of child sexual abuse. So again, the witnesses believe they have the religious authoritative right, and in the U.S., the First Amendment right to practice their freedom, their religion, any way they wish. And that's where we have this clash between what religion is permitted to do and what the law says you can or cannot do. Those are in opposition.
And Mark, I just wanted to clarify, those recommendations were reviewed at the 2-year review. Is that the 2-year review of the report having originally been handed down? So those
I was going to ask about that. What's the timeline in relation to the original Australian Royal Commission? Yeah.
So the legislation has when the report was handed down in 2017, they then created legislation, and there was to be a review at 12 months, that they had certain things that they had to do. And there's just been the 2-year review, which is the report that Mark's referring to, where they look at what has happened since then and where are we up to with recommendations. So that's the report that he's talking about there. So they're basically flagging that, unsurprisingly, Watchtower have elected not to take up those recommendations.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And as Mark has explained, just sickening policies that you would think these are very obvious, rudimentary, uncontroversial suggestions, but for an organization like Jehovah's Witnesses, apparently not so. Now we move on to April, and we don't actually have that much to talk about in terms of April. Obviously, in April 2020, the pandemic was really gathering pace. Everyone was having to come to terms with lockdown restrictions, shortages of toilet roll, and all that sort of thing. But one thing that did become something that we picked up on one of our episodes was was it the Farmers for Food program? Is that what they call it? No, Farmers to Families Food program. That was it. Do you have anything to say about this, Mark?
Yeah, no, I'll try to keep it brief because this is a subject of a whole investigation. So the United States government, and by the way, this just applies to the U.S. So the United States government, because of the fact that farmers, well, first of all, going back to March and April, it was a crisis in the U.S. I mean, we didn't have masks. We couldn't get paper towels and toilet paper. We didn't know if we were ever going to get, mask or N95 mask or the personal protective equipment that we all need. So everyone was frantic. They shut down restaurants. And so this really affected the food industry. And this meant that because all of these restaurants, were shut down for seated dining, that really affected American way of life, and that caused a trickle-down effect. So that meant that the farmers were not selling as much food to the restaurants because the restaurants weren't distributing as much of this food except for maybe carryout. So what the government decided to do was to institute a multi-billion-dollar program where they funded farmers, and they put this out for contract, but they wanted to give billions of dollars to farmers, but they needed those farmers to basically sell them the food, but it needed to be distributed. So they awarded contracts to a few hundred key distributors, food distributors, who would then, they would get on average, let's say $80 to $100 per box of food. All right. And then they would take those boxes of food and they would either distribute themselves, or more likely what they did was they provided them to nonprofit organizations who could then distribute the food either for free, or they might get a couple dollars a box reimbursement. And this is where Watchtower comes in. So Watchtower, the Jehovah's Witnesses, decided that their disaster relief committees would take advantage of this government program, and that they would contact all of these food distributors who had been awarded billions and billions of dollars worth of contracts, and they would distribute that food to Jehovah's Witnesses. So there's a whole lot to this story, and there's 4 phases of the program. Phase 1 was, March through June, and then there was phase 2, 3, and we're now in phase 4, which we believe to be the final phase. But we started getting massive number of reports of Jehovah's Witnesses from all over the U.S. receiving food boxes, many of which didn't need the food. There was a lot of food that was going to waste, and we discovered that the witnesses were taking advantage of this program, and they were getting huge. Look, I've done FOIA requests to the government, and I'm telling you, it's millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of food that they are distributing through their kingdom halls and assembly halls, and they're doing it through their disaster relief committees. One of the things that really caught my eye with all these people contacting us and posting about these food box programs was that they included a letter with one of the, let's say, the California Zone 10 Disaster Relief Committee group. And that letter was placed in each box of food. And the letter, in part, said, in an effort not to bring undesirable attention to our efforts, there are a few things that we would like to keep in mind. Number 1, please keep this gift of food confidential. Don't tell anyone about it. Number 2, do not post pictures of the provisions on any electronic network. Number 3, avoid making statements in the media or any other internet contact regarding what you have received. Number 4, follow the principle stated at Matthew 10, 16, and 7 to be cautious as serpents, yet innocent as doves. Our ability to adhere to these things could have an impact on future donations that we may receive. On the back of this cover letter, there are food safety reminders, etc. So that's from one of the committees that was assigned the task of distributing food. So we have not yet discovered the financial link between these contracts and Watchtower. Now, they're certainly able to receive $2, $3, $4, $5 per box. We don't have financial documents proving that Watchtower is collecting money for this. But what we do have is quite a bit of evidence that the food boxes have been distributed to no one else but Jehovah's Witnesses. Only their members get this food. The public doesn't get it. And believe me, we have a lot of food banks, and I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, where we have a lot of need for food. And I'll just tell you, in one congregation, they announced that they're delivering 43 boxes of food to the congregation. This is just one congregation. So that's almost $4,300 worth of food in just one event, in one phase of this program. And this congregation was an affluent congregation that didn't need any of it. They were all people who had, good jobs. There were 2 or 3 doctors in that congregation. There's a lawyer in that congregation, and they didn't need the food. And I started getting letters from all over that this was the case, not globally, throughout the U.S. So
it's odd, isn't it? Though? Like there's nothing nefarious about distributing food to people who need it, or in the time, in the middle of a crisis or something like that. But it's like they go out of their way to take something that's innocent, that could be innocent and benign, and make it look suspicious, like there's something to hide with that, like that note that they included in the thing. Like, I get people don't need it and all that stuff, but I mean, I'm not saying that there's anything nefarious happening, but it's just why? It's
my belief that there is something nefarious happening, but I have to be careful what I say, because I don't want to misrepresent our team, our research, until I've got all the facts at hand. But one thing I'll tell you is that I've been working with a journalist who's done a brilliant job. Her name is Jessica Few, I'm sorry. Jessica is up in Brooklyn, New York, as she writes for a really good website called The Counter that handles a lot of, FDA food-related things in the United States. So she took all of the evidence that I had sent her, including these letters, and connected her with a number of individuals who testified to what they had experienced with the food box program. So she wrote an article called please take a moment to thank Jehovah. Churches distributing USDA food boxes are blurring the boundaries between church and state. The reason that's significant is because she's not targeting the witnesses. She's targeting any group that misappropriates food that is meant to go to the poor. But as she so brilliantly put it when we first started talking about this, is that these food boxes were coming with a side of religion. So, in other words, it is illegal. In the terms of this contract, it is illegal to attach religious belief to the distribution of government food products and food boxes. There cannot be a correlation between the two. And this is why the article was written, because Jehovah's Witnesses and a few others have blurred the boundary between what they are allowed to do, between distributing food and between basically selling religion. And we have so many cases where witnesses are saying that they got the food and no one else got it. They're only distributing it to Jehovah's Witness church members. They are not offering it to any non-witness, except for like the spouse. And this was they got a hold of Robert Hendricks, the current U.S. spokesperson for Jehovah's Witnesses. He's the latest, incarnation in national spokespersons for the JWs. And he backpedaled and he said, oh, well, those aren't necessarily the instructions that we give to all of our groups. And that we do allow it to go to non-witnesses or non-witness family members. So he very carefully backpedaled out of that. And what it really means is that if you're a family and the wife's a witness and the husband's not, they consider that they're helping non-witnesses because the husband got to eat an apple out of that box. So there's a lot more to this story, but we're short on time. So, there's going to be more. Once I complete my research, there'll be an article on it, but it really, they're in phase 4. And by the way, they've just announced that the witnesses are discontinuing the program. But the witnesses have also announced in a letter received just a couple days ago to all elders that they're going to be using Kingdom Halls in the U.S. Or rather than not just Kingdom Halls, but they'll use garages of witnesses for basically a kind of a food box. I don't want to say food box because they're discontinuing that program, but like a pantry. I think that's what they called it, a pantry, so that they can distribute food to their own members. Really, what I think this goes back to is the paranoia that they had in 1975, that the end of the world's coming. Satan is, things are happening. It's about to happen. And we want to be prepared. We want to have, they mentioned the go bags, because all witnesses have to have a go bag ready to go at moment's notice with, food, flashlights, and so forth.
The code for the secret knock.
The secret knock in the bunker. I remember,
it's not a very sophisticated secret knock, believe me.
Yeah. I remember my mom telling me that, one of our neighbors who was a close friend of ours in Witness, they were hoarding food right before 1975. And they hoarded so much food in their attic that it started to rot. And this was the mindset, and this is the mindset of Jehovah's Witnesses now, is that Armageddon is imminent. We need to protect ourselves only because we are in a bubble. The rest of the world, forget about them. We are the ones Jehovah has chosen for salvation. So thank you for indulging me on that. It's a very interesting story.
I'm really glad it's not indulging you, Mark. People need to hear about this, and I'm fascinated to see what journalism gets done on this moving forward, because if something untoward's been going on, it needs to be brought to light, which we're all about on this show. Yeah.
And that's not to discourage prepping and having, a go bag and emergency rations for any kind of emergency, especially
or a bunker. Yeah.
Or even a bunker, but it should be just for out of prudence and being prepared. It shouldn't be because you're frightened that the end of the world is coming. It's just in case there's an earthquake or a hurricane or a storm or electricity goes, something. You never know. You should be prepared. But yeah, this is.
Yeah.
You guys can't see this, but the print is way too small. I need to print it out properly, but. I have 4 pages total. I'm just showing you 3. these represent all Jehovah's Witness distribution centers just for phase one that have received hundreds of millions of dollars worth of food boxes and are distributing them. This is a result of a FOIA request. And I mean, if I shared the numbers with you guys, it's staggering. What I'm trying to establish is the financial connection, because 501c3 charity distributors are allowed to accept $3, $4, $5, whatever dollars for actually physically distributing the food. What we haven't seen is the physical evidence of that. So, I'm interviewing distributors, and their Watchtower is trying to keep this very, very quiet, as I read you in that other letter. In fact, I think they've figured out that I'm on to them.
Where there's smoke, there is fire, right? And it always helps to follow the money. Always.
Well said.
What we're doing now is following the list of months, and that list is taking us to May. And actually, Mark is up for telling us one of these stories, but I'm just going to give him a bit of a break and tell you what the other story was. A 2019 ruling in Switzerland exonerating a critic of Jehovah's Witnesses became final in May after Watchtower missed a deadline to appeal the outcome of their libel case. This was actually a very interesting story that we dealt with in episode 38, the Swiss verdict. The organization, particularly in Europe, it seems, is getting increasingly litigious, to the extent where they sued a critic for libel. They lost. And when a deadline for appealing the decision came and went, we were able to have representatives of the organization that this individual has been working with on the show to explain more. So that was a really interesting story. Again, we're not just seeing the organization becoming aggressively litigious in its subpoena warfare strategy, we're also seeing them, at least in Europe, going after critics, going after authors like Misha Anouk or Misha Verele, who I've interviewed on the channel. Quite interesting to see. The more the organization struggles in the information age, the more they have this kind of caged animal reaction where they start lashing out.
They are really getting more litigious. I'm just, I don't want to say shocked, but I think we are seeing a lot more cases where they're going after either a journalist or someone who wrote a book. And it's not the only, Misha's case is not the only one in Germany where they've gone after. And by the way, I don't know if we've mentioned this on previous episodes, but we did cover this on JW Survey as an article.
Yeah, you did a good article on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I haven't published the results yet, but as it turns out that, Misha wrote a book called Goodbye Jehovah. And it was published by a very, very well-established publishing house in Germany. I think it's Rallo Publishing, if I'm saying that wrong, sorry. But it's a publishing company that, has a team of lawyers. They fully backed Misha and his book, which was quite popular. And so in the end, he won that case. He had to change very little in his book because they wanted him to remove all sorts of information about he commented on how Jehovah's Witnesses collect time on the time slips and just all sorts of, it was his story about growing up as a witness and how the witnesses treated him and his family. But in the end, Watchtower really did not get what they wanted, and he was exercising his freedom of speech and he was accurate. So he agreed to make some very, very minor changes, but the majority of what Watchtower wanted was rejected by the court. And so it was really a victory for freedom of speech. And it's encouraging for, we highly recommend anyone to tell their story, write a book, write an article, and be honest and forthright. And, don't be afraid of exercising your freedom of speech.
Indeed.
Yeah, they're getting litigious, as we know.
Also in May, 2 new lawsuits. Actually, you covered this, didn't you, at the beginning? So maybe we can skip over it. But it was in May that the 2 new lawsuits were filed in Montana. We covered this in episode 36, the Hardin ring.
Update.
But allow me to just say that was, I think that episode in particular was so disturbing in terms of the content that I didn't even try to even have limited monetization on that. It's basically demonetized by me because I don't want to get into any trouble over it. But the details that we went over were stomach churning. Don't watch that episode if you're struggling with grasping the full extent of the evil that's being concealed by this organization. But yeah, truly shocking cases that were filed there in Montana.
Yeah. So I won't recap any of that, Lloyd. And, if anyone really does want to see the legal aspect of it, they can watch that Watchtower in Focus episode. But the very short story is that, you have two different cases. They're both directly linked. They're involving, the abuse of numerous victims by numerous elders and ministerial servants. That's the whole story in a nutshell. There's a lot of evidence. There's even the ex-wife of one of the main perpetrators has come forward with an affidavit. An ex-elder in the congregation has come forward with an affidavit. All of it is, and of course the victims themselves have provided affidavits. So there's a heap of evidence. But here's where we are now. So the case is progressing quite well. But the defendants in that case were Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York and Watchtower, Pennsylvania, and maybe the local congregation. I don't have the papers in front of me, but this is interesting because Watchtower, Pennsylvania normally is not a defendant in these cases, but these cases occurred during the 1970s and 1980s. So we have an ample amount of evidence that Watchtower, Pennsylvania was the guiding force in Jehovah's Witness corporation policy in the 70s and 80s and before that. In fact, all the way up to the year 2000, when they removed the governing body members from all these corporations and they basically are, they just became a spiritual body, and they put replacements into these corporations, and they formed CCJW, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. So before that, though, we have incredible amount of evidence that Watchtower, Pennsylvania was the equivalent of the governing body. In fact, it even says so in multiple watchtowers that Watchtower, Pennsylvania, or the society, is the governing body. And the governing body controlled all of that. Well, Watchtower has put up a fight in both of these Montana cases saying, no. Watchtower, Pennsylvania is just the copyright holder and enforcer of copyrights. That's why Watchtower, Pennsylvania is the one that sues, Dark Spilver and all of these other people regarding copyright. So lengthy evidence has been produced. And I want to right now thank everyone that has reached out to us with evidence, because I'll tell you right now, there are some pieces of information that have found their way to JW Survey. For example, the 1977 branch organization original manual, which you now have, Lloyd, in your collection.
Mark's really sore about that because
someone I had it.
Someone offered it to me, and Mark saw the email and said, "Do you mind if I scan it for public consumption?" Which he did, and then after that, he had to forward it on to me, so it's now in the bunker.
Yes.
In safekeeping, but yes, Mark
it
continues to grind his teeth over that particular item in my collection.
But I'm
Mark will find a way. He will. Yeah,
he does have sticky fingers, does our Mark? Yeah, so you just never know.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
But I want to thank the person. I don't know that he wants to be identified, but I want to thank the person who sent that in, along with other documents, because these documents have played a critical role in proving multiple things, including the fact that Watchtower, Pennsylvania, and the governing body were just, co-conspirators in everything that had to do with the witnesses, for decade after decade, including the relevant period of the 1970s and the 1980s. So we've been putting together stacks of evidence, addition to that, proving that Watchtower, Pennsylvania was holding control over these congregations, including Montana. In fact, this is interesting. I found this has played a role in the case. Here is a booklet from this particular one is 1949. And this was
I've got that, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there's several versions of this. And
Right.
there's a 1960 version. I've got a whole stack of them on my desk, and maybe we'll have a trade, Lloyd. But this is very interesting. So this particular booklet's playing a role in the Montana case because it's written by the governing body in Watchtower, Pennsylvania, but it includes the name of a woman who was a witness here in Montana, and it's proof that this booklet was used in Montana, which doesn't seem significant until you get to a court case like this, and then you realize, oh, this is significant. In fact, I even went down the rabbit hole and found out that the person named in this booklet lived to 104 years of age and had a Jehovah's Witness funeral. And she was the Montana woman that owned this booklet, which
Maybe the booklet has special powers.
I mean, it's we're short on time, so it's a terrific story. But thank you for everyone that has sent in booklets, books, whatever. It all means something. We archive everything, and it's to help these abuse victims in these cases. And no matter how insignificant it might seem, send it to us. So the case is progressing very well. And the end of that story is that the judge has just ruled against Jehovah's Witnesses. They were trying to get Watchtower, Pennsylvania excluded from the lawsuit because they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation themselves. Pennsylvania is big. But they're saying, oh, no, we didn't have anything to do with this Montana congregation or the affairs of the congregation. That is a lie. That is an outright lie. They know it. They didn't realize we were going to come up with all this evidence. The judge has ruled against them. And so the case is proceeding with Watchtower, New York and Pennsylvania as defendants. So that's the short story, but that's one good thing that happened in 2020. So thank you for indulging me there.
No, but again, fascinating. I really appreciate the detail there. We do need to press on, though, to June. And before I do that, quick super chat through from Janice Melton. My grandma gets food from them and the city, and she said she doesn't need it, but the elders said she has to take it so that they can continue to.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm sure there's countless stories
Countless.
like that. Yeah.
I've heard countless stories about that.
So in
Please
June,
send them all. If I can make an appeal to anyone.
please, yeah.
This is an ongoing case and investigation. So our investigation. So please, if you have those experiences, like the person who just issued the super chat, please email them to, I guess we would do contact address for JW
Hang
Survey.
on, let me just do a very quick banner.
Thank you, Lloyd. This is very helpful. So if Lloyd's going to put up an email address, so if you have any information or experiences where you've received or witnesses have received food boxes that they did not need, they didn't ask for, by all means, please send them to contact@jwsurvey.org and we'll archive those and it'll be part of the investigation. And I just thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
Brilliant. So moving on to June. There's just one story on my list. On June the 18th, noted Watchtower apologist Rolf Feruli was disfellowshipped from Larvik congregation in Norway. So Feruli had written a book about his thoughts about the organization. The book was titled My Beloved Religion and the Governing Body. I have a hard copy of it on my shelf. I was just reminding myself of the title. So yes, we did a full episode on this whole story. If you want all the details, please watch episode 37, the Feruli expulsion. It was arguably the most noteworthy defection in terms of sending out ripples since arguably Raymond Franz, because this was a renowned elder in Norway that had very much leapt to the organization's defense over various issues, including 607 BCE. Because of his scholarly credentials, his words carried a lot of weight, continue to carry weight, some would say. And yes, it sent out a ripple in Norway. I remember the episode that we did got a lot of interest. So if you want to know more about that particular story, please do check out the relevant episode. Now, we're skipping across July and August because not too much happened that I could think of readily in July, but August was significant because August, of course, was when we had the hearings for the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, which had been scheduled for March, but March, of course, was when COVID-19 became a pandemic, and the hearings were delayed until August. I was a core participant in the hearings, so I was involved in those hearings. There was another group of core participants, advocates for awareness of abuse. I don't mean to offend the group, but they were a group of advocates with varying backgrounds involving child sex abuse, who brought an enormous amount of, in many cases, first-hand knowledge to the evidence before the inquiry. And on Watchtower's side, they were represented by headquarters spokesperson Paul Gillies. And I still haven't brought myself to fully cover everything that transpired on those hearings, because it was frankly quite traumatizing, having spent months and months and months working behind the scenes to write up pages and pages and pages of evidence and cooperate with the inquiry. It was frankly traumatizing to, number one, see the amount of, how can I put this? I felt personally that Paul Gillies was treated somewhat with kid gloves. I don't think he was asked the hard questions I would have liked to see him answer. He was allowed to be evasive and in some cases outright mislead the inquiry, and also a fairly rudimentary request that myself and the other core participants group made to the inquiry, namely that the inquiry should get disclosure of all of the data regarding child abuse in England and Wales. The inquiry frankly declined to get the data, even though they effectively had it in front of them. They just refused to look at it, making it, in my view, nowhere near as effective in terms of getting to the bottom of things as the Australian Royal Commission. And that's kind of an ongoing thing. There was more that happened the following month, but I'm interested, what were your thoughts, panel, on the hearings themselves in August?
Well, I can just say I was a little bummed that the hearings were in August, because I salivated at the idea of maybe seeing Paul Gillies in person. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to cancel that plan. But no, I think it was a very powerful statement. And again, we always point to the Australian Royal Commission as the bar for this kind of action with Watchtower. But anytime you get a Watchtower official on a stand where he has to answer questions, it's an opportunity to mine some sound bites that will help the cause. And so I always look at those, and I'm appreciative of the people who work to make that happen. So I was content with that. But of course, we want to see more. I would have loved to have just planted a camera in front of Paul Gillies. That would have been amazing, but we'll get our shot.
Sure.
Yeah. I also, I know that there was some very, very disappointed people when the data wasn't, the decision to ask for additional data wasn't made. And I also know that there's a lot of dissension. And Lloyd, you and I disagree on this to some extent. I just don't see ICSA as a complete waste of time. I think it's extremely important. I know that there was a lot of work put in and people had expectations on what was going to come out of it. But, we're now 5 years down the track from the Royal Commission, and we're now just seeing, we'll talk about it shortly, but we're now just seeing the effects that can, it had a lot of effect anyway, but the significant effect to the organisation. And we're just starting to see that now. So I still want to just continue my message and chin up everybody that's been involved, everybody that's, looking for change in the United Kingdom, Scotland and Wales and England. Chin up. I still believe the wheels of justice move slowly, and I still believe that there was so much value in it. Like Javier said, the information that Paul Gillies gave is almost as good as the information that Jeffrey Jackson gave, and it's factual, government-based information that people can use to talk to their family members that are still in the organisation or who have questions. It's just there's so much blatant lying in it. It's not funny. There's still some huge value, and if people that participated in the ICSA hearing, including you, Lloyd, if you didn't do that and didn't make the effort and put the work in, there wouldn't be that information for family members to share with their loved ones. So I just say thank you to everybody who did participate.
Thank you. Yeah, as someone who spent months and months and months working on it, I don't want it to be a waste of time, and I'm hoping it won't be. It's just you always have these expectations in your head, and what actually ended up happening was nowhere near sort of what I expected. But I suppose some of that was beyond everyone's control, because I really relished my day in court, staring across the room, staring Paul Gillies down across the room, and obviously that was beyond everyone's control. G. Bunting says, has ICSA made any recommendations? We're waiting for the findings of ICSA in relation to this particular investigation to be released in the summer of 2021. So that's when you can expect the findings. Moving on to... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to comment that, a lot of times with these things, we expect to have like that Jack Nicholson, a few good men moment, you can't handle the truth breakdown, understand? And, so, we Kim is right. The wheels of justice often do move slow, and so we're not gonna see that moment. Realistically, that won't happen. But we take what we can get, and if it pushes the needle forward a little bit, then it's still a win.
And arguably, look, Australia had a commission, New Zealand's having a commission. There's word that there'll be something in Germany, England and Wales. Slowly but surely, more and more countries are realising this is something that needs to actually be properly looked at. And exactly. So I'm very, very proud to have played some small part in my own country of birth. Staying on ICSA, we moved to September, because one thing that happened that seemed fairly innocuous at the time, we obviously did an ICSA debrief on the channel, which was episode 39, and we mentioned in passing that at the end of Paul Gillies' testimony, I think on the first day, or was it on the second day? I think on the second day of questioning.
Yeah, the second day.
Paul Gillies was asked an awkward question by inquiry panelist Ivor Frank regarding some comments that were made in a leaked video about data management, specifically the potential for information to be destroyed in case, quote, Satan is coming for the organization. I forget what the exact words were.
Coming after them.
Yeah, Satan's coming after them. So we kind of shrugged this off at the time. It was interesting. It had our interest momentarily. What we didn't know was that behind the scenes, Watchtower was absolutely apoplectic at being asked an awkward question about information that they didn't think ICSA should have had access to. And they wanted to know how they had access to it, who was responsible for them having access to it. And ultimately, we learned that in September, they tried to get ICSA inquiry panel member Ivor Frank, a renowned legal professional, recused from ICSA for asking this question, because they argued that he wasn't partial, because he'd been in league with apostates like myself and Jason Wynn and Mark, which he obviously hadn't been. He actually came across the information by doing his own independent research on the Philadelphia Inquirer website, which had the relevant footage, and still has the relevant footage. And as a result of this back and forth with ICSA, we learned that back in, I think, February, CCJW had actually appealed for me to be thrown off the investigation on grounds that I am, quote, a hate speech enthusiast. So that opened a whole new can of worms, in which I said, right, well, now that I've been publicly accused of hate speech, I deserve to be able to clear my name. My lawyer, Richard Scorer, who's just a fantastic human being, pursued this issue with ICSA. ICSA finally relented and freed me of my duty of confidentiality, and allowed me to divulge the relevant documents. And I'm still working my way through them on the channel. I think I've done so far episodes 1 to 4 of the Hate Speech series, and I intend to do 5, 6, and 7, hopefully in January. But suffice to say, the dossier, the 9-page dossier that CCJW issued to ICSA back in, I think, February, was just a blatant example of misrepresentation, of misquotes like you won't believe. They were literally taking clips or quoting clips from my videos and then cutting me off just before I would say, obviously, and then saying something that completely contradicted what they were trying to make out that I was saying. So it was absolutely fascinating. If you want to know more, please check out my Hate Speech series. But yes, all of that happened.
It's astounding to me, Lloyd, that they thought they could get away with that. Yeah. I mean, it's either complete delusion or they thought you weren't going to see that document. But the fact that they could make these accusations, if number one, if they believe the accusations, then boy, did they have a problem. That's insanity, because it's pretty easy, to prove, as you did, that the things they accused you of were just insane.
But it does get added,
and it required some manipulation of your content.
That's true,
right?
Yeah.
Like they had to nitpick what they were going to
cherry pick,
pull out of it, and so there was someone behind the scenes just doing some devious calculations. Like that's really what happened. And trying to figure out how, some legal maneuvering or something that they can present to support their claim. But so I mean, again, it's when you see the sausage being made is it's another example of this stuff. It's like
I mean, again, I'm still working my way through the series, and I'm hoping to do parts 4 through 7 in the weeks ahead. But I can tell you that in total, the 9-page dossier includes 37 examples of hate speech, and of those 37 examples, at least 3 of them weren't even me. They were just people commenting in the live chat or in the comments, and they just included them in hopes that ICSA would just breeze through and think, oh wow, he really said that, So that's how disingenuous.
A couple of points on that. The thing is, it's a legal strategy, and I accept that in the world that's an acceptable practice to do that and to try and make your case. But, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, you cannot claim to be no part of the world if you're going to use legal strategies that are used by the world. So, pick your mark and stick to it, Watchtower. Stop saying you're no part of the world if you're going to do that. The other thing that really, there's so much involved with, when you pick out bits and pieces, they're going after you, Lloyd, with ICSA, but then they're also going after Kevin McCree, who is Lego Man, for those who don't know. And you're implicated a little bit in that as well. Like, there's your name's being referenced. And it seems that, that they've just, and then you look back at Dark Spilver and all of these particular cases that they're going after. And I just, yet again, all it does is just to prove what everybody says. If it's the truth, it'll stand the test of time. So they're just, like Javier has said many times, they've just got a gun constantly loaded at their feet. And I just hate their strategy on that. You're either part of the world or you're not.
Well, they've shot themselves in the foot, and now, and it was just a passing mention as well in their paperwork against Ivor Frank. They didn't need to include me in order to make their arguments, but they just couldn't resist it because they felt that they were being persecuted and discriminated against. So they included my name. That set in motion a whole series of events that led to me posting on my YouTube channel clear examples of them lying. Yeah. So it's all come right back round to bite them in the ass. They really don't have a clue.
No.
Here's an interesting quote. It's very brief, but when I read the 1957 Watchtower, there were some just brilliant comments in there. When I say brilliant, I mean sort of incriminating.
Mark often reads the 1957 Watchtower, in case anyone is wondering. Yeah,
all the time. But this was a great one, full of gems. So here's one from paragraph 11, anyway. It's 1957. If anyone wants the reference, I'll give it to them. But it says, coming out of this world with its contentions and self-interest, we may sometimes be inclined to forget that we are now living as a new world society. That means we are a community to ourselves. We do not need the law courts and arbitration boards of this corrupt and dying world.
There we go. That
Thought
stood
that
the
was very
test of
telling.
time.
And I just wanted to throw my phone when you sent that over, Mark.
Kim,
Yeah.
can you quickly answer this question from Christina Mason? I hope Kevin is being supported. I think he is, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's got funded lawyers and whatnot, but I don't know anything about Kevin. I don't even know who he is, but I have a lot of respect for his work. He's very, very, very. He's obviously an intelligent man, but I do understand that he has significant health issues, physical health issues, and so I can't imagine the impact that it's having on him. So I don't know, I guess the only support that we really as a community can provide to him is just our moral support. If you want to reach out and support him, but on a legal level, he is being supported. Yes.
Good.
He has pro se counsel, he was representing himself pro se, which means, representing yourself. But he did reach out a long time ago to a law firm similar to EFF that supported Dark Spilver. He's got a law firm that took on his case pro bono, which means that they have realized that it's an important case to defend him. So they're doing it for free. And there have been some updates in that case. If we have time, I'll get to them later. I don't want to do that now. But, just know that case is actually still ongoing and there have been some developments. But as far as I know, he's doing well. And he does have attorneys that are fighting Watchtower. And by the way, Watchtower is spending a lot of money in this case and others. They've hired Cohen something or other. It's a well-known copyright attorney in New York, a team of attorneys that Watchtower has on retainer because Watchtower is not, they're not copyright specialists, so they have to spend a lot of money. And of course, we'll get into that if we touch on the Ala Jones situation because they have hired
we will.
Law firm. Yeah. To be continued.
So, November, we're skipping October completely, not just for sake of time, but because we can't really remember too much that happened that month. But in November, a press release from Senator Ann Ruston threatened Watchtower with removal of charitable status over their continuing refusal to join Australia's redress scheme for child sex abuse victims, and Kim has got the skinny.
I'm just enjoying Javier's. So yes, Senator Ruston, who has become my favorite person just about on the planet. She's an amazing woman, strength like I've never seen from a politician in Australia, full stop, let alone a woman, which doesn't matter, but she's amazing. So they've named and shamed Watchtower as one of 6 originally organisations who refused to join the redress scheme. That was then brought down to 4. But I haven't made the point before. The other 3 are not national organisations. Some of them are like a 2-man show. The Pony Club, for example, they're not a massive organisation. They're just a small country town local organisation. So they're not having any standing considering what's going on with Watchtower. And the reason that the Senator Ruston continually and the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, continually point out Jehovah's Witnesses because they're not only a national organisation, but they're actually an international organisation. Watchtower is by far and beyond they're 1% and Watchtower 99%, just to give people an idea of the comparison. So it's not, again, it is not religious persecution. The reason they're going after Watchtower so badly is because of the fact that they're such a large organisation. They've got so many victims. They have claims with the redress scheme, and that they have not, they're just refusing to join. Again, as we previously discussed, because they're saying we don't have to join. We've determined that we're not, we don't have the institutional settings, therefore we don't have to join. And the government has basically turned around and said, yes, you do. So she put out a message. They warned them. They said that they would start naming and shaming. They put it in the legislation when they first tabled the legislation. They've been warned and warned and warned. And so Senator Ruston put out a final warning in November saying, join or else. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure everyone's heard me bang on about it enough, they've now introduced legislation to the government, the Federal Senate and House of Representatives. It's been passed. It's been granted assent, which means that the Governor General, on behalf of the Queen, has signed off on it, and the legislation comes into place 3 months from that date, which I don't have right in front of me now because I'm in central Queensland on holidays, but it was earlier in December, so about January, February it'll start. So basically Watchtower now have got 6 months from the date that the legislation became into place, which was December. They've got 6 months and they will lose their charitable status if they haven't done it by that date. Or
which date was that again? Sorry.
It was early in December. Mark,
no, what's the deadline for them by which point they'll lose their charitable status?
6 months from the date that the legislation was signed off by the Governor General. So that was early in December. And so they've got 6 months if they haven't. But just for transparency, the legislation also says that so someone claimed in July of last year, when for the redress scheme, made an application for Watchtower. It's also 6 months from the first date of that claim, July. So it'll be early in 2021 that they will lose their status.
Okay, wow. Big developments there in Australia, and we covered this for our last episode number 42, Redress Retribution. So please look up that episode if you want more information.
Can I just also say on that note, Harvey put a question to me in the live stream that I actually just was like, I don't know. We was talking about there's been a lot of claims made, and there was a senator made comment in the parliament about that they're funneling out information and they're selling off all the Kingdom Halls to get rid of it so they don't have to pay for the redress. There's 2 points that I wanted to make on that. Firstly, the Watchtower organisation have been selling off Kingdom Halls well before the redress scheme was even thought of, and before the Royal Commission even existed. So I wanted to make that point. And the other thing is that, and it's probably more of a case of trying to encourage people, if you haven't claimed because Watchtower are not part of the redress scheme, there's a funds of last resort in the legislation, so that if for whatever reason the organisation that's responsible for your child abuse hasn't joined, for example, Watchtower, you can still lodge an application, and there are provisions that the government have made for funding. It's called funding provisions of last resort, where they can then, if they've exhausted every other opportunity to get you funds, you can then access the fund. They will grant your claim out of the funds of last resort. So please, if you haven't lodged a claim on that basis, I'm more than happy to provide some support and assistance for you to lodge, because it's not a lost cause. There are still opportunities, even if Watchtower don't join. But the more people that put claims in, the more it supports the government's decision, because I do expect that Watchtower will lodge an appeal once their charitable status has been removed. I'd say they will then lodge an appeal on that decision, and it would just support the government if your claim is in and they're saying we have victims, you're not joining. So if you haven't joined, if you haven't lodged and you want to, but you need support, I will help you, no problems.
And the address is below, support@jwsurvey.org.
Kim, if I could ask you a question, Kim, I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but obviously Jehovah's Witnesses are not going to go down without a fight in Australia. So if the government does proceed with the legislation that removes their charitable status, that is not an easy thing to remove. Charitable status is I'm sure it doesn't happen that often, especially with an organization that has 60,000-70,000 members in your country. So clearly there will be some kind of an appeal process. I'm not sure if that's the appeal you were just referring to a few minutes ago, but what is your opinion of what may happen if Watchtower appeals that? And is there a higher court, like in Europe, that you may appeal to in international court? What is the situation in Australia? Is there a place Watchtower would appeal to internationally, or does it stay within Australia?
Well, they do have the opportunity to appeal to the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission, the human rights legislation has actually been addressed in the redress legislation, or the new bill that's been, or it's now the law that has been implemented, and they've justified why it's not religious persecution, and they've justified very, very clearly that it complies with it. I mean, that's not to say that Watchtower won't appeal on that basis. So they can go right to the High Court in Australia. So there's a court process ending in the High Court. But I don't necessarily, it may get there because the government's involved. It possibly could. I don't think so.
So as far as you know, that will stay within Australia, the fight?
I believe it will. I don't think that it'll go to, it's just not religious persecution. I don't think it'll get any legs in the human rights international courts. The best case scenario for them would be the High Court of Australia, but that's not even a given.
Are they claiming persecution, or have they made that statement yet?
Yeah. They've in some of their submissions, particularly the last submissions they made earlier in October, I think it was, before before the legislation was implemented, and as part of the 2-year review we were talking about earlier, they did talk about religious persecution and human rights. Human rights and their human rights, and as to their choice of their religion and persecution. The way they implied it was very, very similar to the way they implied it in the letter that they made to ICSA in respect of Lloyd. It was sort of not anything specific. It was just very general, and their references are completely ridiculous to the facts. They're missing the point that this is not religious persecution. This is complying with Caesar's law. It doesn't infringe on their ability to practice their religion in any way, shape or form, anyhow they want. It's simply, this is what you must do, as all the other religions are doing. So there has been undertones from them that they'll claim religious persecution, yeah.
At this point, they'll claim anything is religious persecution.
Absolutely.
McAllen's shortage would be religious persecution to them right now.
Absolutely.
Ridiculous.
Fact, yep.
Now, on my notes, Mark has inserted some text with the heading, News Out of Chicago, Illinois. I'm intrigued, Mark.
So we have not covered this previously.
And this relates to November, does it?
It does. This is significant, and I think
because I must have my ordering accurate in order to appease my OCD. Okay.
Well, this, in fact, I should have put a date in there, but I can get you the date. It definitely happened.
Not good enough, Mark. Not good enough.
Okay, well, I will find you that, and repent in sackcloth and ashes,
please. Thank you. Yeah.
So, in the month of November. This is something that not a lot of people have paid attention to or know about or have all the details for, but I'll explain as simply as I can. 2 Jehovah's Witness elders were arrested and charged with failure to report child abuse in a case that goes back to 2006, where these elders, now this is a little suburb of Chicago called McHenry. So, Chicago's a big place, dozens and dozens and dozens of Jehovah's Witness congregations. So there's a little congregation there in the McHenry area where there had been abuse that took place. The abuser, and I can say this because it's been adjudicated in the courts. The man's name was Arturo Hernandez Pedraza. He was a Jehovah's Witness who for many years abused his daughter from at least the ages of 6 or 7 until after high school. Now, what had happened was in 2006, elders became aware of this, at least by that date. They may have been aware of it sooner, but we know for a fact that they've admitted that they knew about it going back to 2006. Now, here's what happened. Last year, there was a criminal trial in Chicago following the arrest of Mr. Pedraza, the Jehovah's Witness. He wasn't an elder to my knowledge, but he was a witness, Latin American witness for a long time. He was arrested for multiple charges of abuse of his child. over many years. He was imprisoned. There was a trial last year. He was sentenced to 50 years in an Illinois prison. He was found guilty, unanimously by the jury. Now, that was the first case. That was the first piece of evidence that you need to know about. Meanwhile, the police in McHenry, Illinois, began investigating why this happened and why it was not reported to the police, because Illinois, like most other states, have mandatory clergy reporting laws that need to be obeyed, just like Montana, except they got away with it in that exception, right? So what had happened there was in November, Lloyd, in November, two elders, I can name because they're in police documents here, which can be obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, which I have done. In fact, the latest just came in today, a 25-page document. The elders were Michael Pancava and Colin Scott. Now, Michael Pancava is in his 70s. Colin Scott, I believe, is 87 years of age. They both have been charged in relation to failing to report child abuse in 2006 when they became aware of what had happened. They're scheduled to appear in court on January 6th, but I want to, so we're going to find out next week what happens to them and whether or not they evade the charges. So some people are going to have questions about this. Number one, it was what they call a non-custodial arrest. That means that they were arrested, but they weren't taken to prison. I mean, you've got a 70-some-year-old man, an 87-year-old man. They're both witness elders. They've got pack-jammed prisons in Illinois and everywhere else. But this is a Class A misdemeanor. I want to make that clear, that these guys have been arrested for a Class A misdemeanor. I've got some of the charging documents here, but the Class A misdemeanor means that the penalty for that is up to 1 year in prison and I believe up to a $2,500 fine. Now, it's going to be up to a judge to determine whether or not they're found guilty because they've been charged. They're released on their own recognizance at this point. They're not. I don't even think they had to post bail, but they've been charged with a Class A misdemeanor, which is the most serious of the misdemeanors in Illinois. And I just cannot express enough how significant this is and how important this is, that the police and the prosecution for Illinois has seen the problem and has decided to take action. How often do we hear this? We don't hear it. We saw it in Delaware in one case where the state of Delaware sued the Jehovah's Witnesses for failure to report child abuse according to the law. And the witnesses lost. What they ended up doing was settling with Delaware, and they paid basically a $20,000 fine, and they had to go through training, child abuse reporting training, and some other things. But here we have all of these numerous cases across the U.S. and elsewhere where we've not seen the state prosecutor actually file charges. But this case was so egregious. These elders knew so much about what had happened to this young girl from the ages of 7 all the way to 19 for all those years, and they did nothing. They didn't contact the police, child protection authorities. And I see Danny Bear says a misdemeanor, it's a joke for abusing a child. But just to be clear, it's for not reporting the abuse of a child. It's for lack of reporting. That is very serious now. And I'm just so happy that Illinois, regardless of the outcome, I don't know if they're going to get off. They've both obtained attorneys. At this point, we don't know how much Watchtower's involved. I do have some evidence that Watchtower is advising them or advising their attorneys, but I need to get specifics, and I'll try to do that. And if it means going to Chicago, I'll do that as well. But with COVID, we don't know what's going to be allowed. So, but hey, look, again, I can't stress enough how important it is that two elders have been charged with a Class A misdemeanor for failing to report child abuse. And it seems like the tide is turning, that they're just not going to get away with these cover-ups, because this is what this is about. It's about the cover-up. It's about the fact that Watchtower told those elders not to report. In fact, I have all of the trial transcripts, and unfortunately, we just didn't have time to cover it last year. It didn't get attention, but that trial involved the judge bringing this elder, Michael Pencava, before the court, and he declined, or he refused to testify as to what he knew about the abuser and what he had done to this girl. Now, the judge had to adjudicate that by forcing this elder to testify in areas where he could not get away with calling clergy privilege. And that got a little complicated. So basically, the judge ruled that he had to talk except for where the defendant was making a confession, because it's, you still have this confessional exception where the elders don't have to reveal what was said in a confession. But in other cases where, like, they announced to the congregation that this guy was disfellowshipped, that is something that the judge permitted the elder to discuss, even though the elder tried to refuse. He was forced. So ultimately we'll release these transcripts. I think they're going to have to be redacted because they involve the name of the actual victim, and we will not release the name of the victim in this case. So, wow. I mean, just big news. We'll find out more next week about it, but I'm just so thankful. And isn't it sad that you've got these elders? It's great that justice is being done, but you got an 87-year-old elder who covered this up for so long, and now he's been hauled off to court. And this guy obviously has a family.
I gotta be honest. I don't feel bad for them at all. I mean, if they covered it up and the worst outcome for them is that they have to suffer through some court hearings and be forced to testify, or whatever the penalty, a fine or whatever it might be. I don't feel bad for them at all. Yeah,
it's the law, and they've endangered children.
This is so clear cut.
Yeah.
This is a case where here you have a 7-year-old child in 2006. They knew that this was ongoing and this man could hurt this child, and he hurt her badly. And it continued, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, but for another 13 years this happened. It is egregious, and they just thought,
whatever they have to suffer as a result of, is nothing in comparison to 13 years of abuse. So, I don't care if it's 90. Let them sit
everybody posted. Yeah, thank you, Javier. We'll keep everybody posted on what happens.
Moving into this month, December, and 2 stories spring to mind. I don't know which to do first. Shall we get the Aled Jones one out of the way? Because I want to end on a high. Not that the Aled Jones story isn't a high. I mean, I don't know. Watchtower is suing BMG Music over use of Listen, Obey, and Be Blessed by little-known singer Aled Jones. Mark, you've accepted the challenge of explaining all this. I did actually do a video on my channel where I alerted my viewers, and I did say in that video that there would be more information when we know more. I put to my viewers a number of different scenarios as to what might be going on, and I think it ended up being like a combination of scenarios. Basically, the law, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the law, as I understand it, allows people to cover songs by other people, in some cases without their permission, which is what BMG did in this case. What they've done is legal, but what they haven't counted on is the fact that Watchtower has set its face against any form of interfaith project, which is what this is. It's one of their Kingdom Melodies, Spiritual Food, on an interfaith album, which basically sets them as total hypocrites if they are standing back and allowing this to happen. So due to their own theological stance, in order to effectively save face in front of Jehovah's Witnesses, they've had to use up considerable time and resources in suing BMG over their use of this song, even though it seems it was all done legally. Have I explained it correctly?
Yes, and to ultra simplify this, here's a Jehovah's Witness song that I think most of us find absolutely ridiculous. It's called Listen, Obey, and Be Blessed. I think it was produced in association with a JW Children's video. Now that's been inserted into their songbook, which is copyrighted. And, it's a song about really indoctrinating children and being obedient, not only to their parents, but to the organization. It's really a telling thing that children are subjected to this kind of music. And I was just thinking the other day, I don't know what I would have thought, as I was a child growing up, because obviously this came out much later for me. I wasn't subjected to this song as a child, but come on, listen, obey, and be blessed. Well, what's happened was this, fairly well-known in Europe singer, Ala Jones.
No, he wasn't well-known. He's well-known among grannies. Come on,
well,
let's be honest.
Yeah, within the context of his bubble, within religious, I think, enough to get Watchtower's attention. This is not a nobody to Watchtower.
Yeah.
But among religious singers, he seems to be fairly popular. But he's produced a Christmas album, and I think it's called Blessings. And he has shockingly taken the song Listen, Obey, and Be Blessed and put it on his album. And we all saw that well before we knew about there was going to be a lawsuit. And we thought, oh, wow, how did he get away with this? Because we know Watchtower copyrights everything. Then we started getting emails from a friend of the program who is a musician herself, and we learned, she kind of educated us on how the process works, where, there are certain mechanical licenses that can be obtained, allowing someone to cover a song. And I'm not going to get into any of it because it's really kind of, I think, way beyond the discussion. It's so technical, and there's so many entities involved in producing songs legally and covering songs. But essentially what he's done is he's covered the song, which means he's taken a song that someone else produced and he's covered it, so he's not allowed to change the melody significantly or the words significantly. So that's what he's done. He's basically produced this song, he's placed it on an album of multiple other religious songs, including Catholic.
Otherwise known the kind of music that you listen to while you're watching paint dry. Yes.
So like Lloyd said, maybe a lot of grannies really like this kind of music, but, they're going to make some money. He's selling this album for anywhere from, £5 to £20. I've seen it, depending on where you are. It's and so, of course, royalties have to be paid to whoever, and it seems that to each song they're paying royalties to whoever owns the copyright of each song. It's a complex process. It really is. So, but we've learned that in many cases it's okay to do that as long as you go through the right process and you pay your royalties, per play of the song. You could buy 100 plays, 200 plays, or unlimited, whatever the case, as long as you pay your royalties. Well, so Watchtower's decided to file a lawsuit because they're claiming copyright infringement, that, proper procedures were not followed. And they're claiming that this is damaged their organization beyond what any litigation can solve. One statement, and it's a 15-page document filed by Watchtower attorney Paul Polidoro. And here's one statement. It says, in line with Bible-based teachings and practices of Jehovah's Witnesses, Watchtower does not commercialize its original works of authorship, does not allow its original works of authorship to be used in conjunction with other religions or expressions thereof, does not allow original works to be used in conjunction with the celebration of Christmas, a holiday that is not observed by Jehovah's Witnesses. Watchtower's engagement in such activities would be viewed as antithetical to the Bible-based teachings and practices of Jehovah's Witnesses, and thus hypocritical, causing Watchtower to be viewed significantly in a negative light, including by millions of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide. That's just one of the many statements made by Watchtower in this.
If they would just roll with the punches on that one, they could just include an Ala Jones CD in the little food boxes that they're handing out.
It's an oddity. I mean, I can't get too interested in this story because, quite frankly, when we're looking at lawsuits, I think we've got our work cut out looking at the child sex abuse lawsuits. This is just kind of like an oddity for me, because Watchtower has found itself in a situation where it has kind of theologically forced itself into, again, expending time and resources. I think they've hired quite an expensive law firm, haven't they, to do all this. So in a way, I'm kind of glad from the point of view of them basically being sent on a wild goose chase, and hopefully it will kind of weaken their ability to litigate against apostates, and try and silence criticism, at least for a bit. Who knows? But in the grand scheme of things, I think this is kind of more of a pub quiz question than something that will go down in the annals of Watchtower history.
If they lose, we'd have a good laugh, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
We'll see. I mean, I think they Watchtower actually may have a case for winning this. So, we're just reporting on it. We don't know which way it's going to go.
We don't really care. Whatever happens. Yeah.
The law firm they've hired is Cohen, Leibowitz, and Latman of New York. So it's a very high-priced law firm that handles copyright issues. Watchtower has hired them on retainer in several other cases, including the Kevin case. What is it? JW? Not Kevin.
Kevin McFree.
Kevin McFree. And then there was another case that they hired Cohen in, and maybe others we don't know about. But I just looked up one statement here. So they're seeking preliminary and permanent injunctive relief and damages for willful copyright infringement. And I was trying to see if there's another one that's.
Kim, you're. I mean, I don't want to dive into this too much, but I mean, what damages could this have caused them in any way? Like, I can't even wrap my head around it.
From their point of view, again, like Watchtower always does, they're seeing it from their utilitarian point of view, where they just say, we have the truth, we have the organization, you're infringing on our theocratic arrangements, by celebrating this song on Christmas. It happens all over the world, but they just, again, they're saying that the damage is that they've been dragged in and being part of the Satan system of things. That's ultimately what the bottom line is. They've just used legal jargon to talk about it.
Just because, like, from what I've heard on other cases of copyright infringement or whatever, like, there's usually damage. They have to prove damages, basically. If it caused you some kind of financial harm or whatever, or tarnished your reputation or something, like for real, like your child sexual abuse hasn't tarnished your reputation enough that you have to,
it's simply because they continually press home that we're different, we're not part of this world. We're like, they do it with the Regis game. I could go on for days about it. They did it with ICSA. They've done it all over the place, and this is just another classic example of them saying, you can't use us because we're no part of the world. You can't put it on a secular Christmas album because we're no part of the world. We don't celebrate Christmas. It's not, you can't do that to us. And it's actually their organization, because witnesses, indoctrinated witnesses, they recognize that song, and they would hear that song being played and they'd be saying, why is this happening? So you're not just affecting the fringe dwellers or the PMOs or the XJW community, you're actually potentially raising questions within the PME society, and they would do everything they can to try and protect that.
PME meaning physically in, mentally in.
The fully indoctrinated ones. Yeah.
Now,
well, I'll just read this statement if I can, just very briefly here. So here's the statement, item number 59 in this 15-page document. It says, upon information and belief, as a result of defendant's unlawful actions described above, plaintiff has been and or will be damaged and suffered and will continue to suffer immediate and irreparable injury for which plaintiff has no adequate remedy at law. I mean, it's just, they're going over the top with this. In fact, if you read the documents, which are readily available, I think Avoid JW has a nice little article on it. So you can download all of the documents. There's 9 different documents, but this one is the main complaint. They're actually quoting from or referring to mostly the apostate comments that have been made on the YouTube So Alex Jones has this song on his YouTube channel, and it's, if you notice, this has got way more attention than any of his other songs. You've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. In fact, I think someone downloaded them, and it's like 20 or 30 or 40 pages. It's crazy how many pages of comments. And most of them are from ex-witnesses or apostates that have commented on the hypocrisy. But yet what's interesting is that Paul Polidoro, for the witnesses, he's referring to those comments, saying, look at what damage is being done because of the comments made, by our members. But they're really not. It's the ex-witnesses that are pointing out the hypocrisy. So I'm not sure if the judge is going to buy it. We don't know what's going to happen.
The good thing is, if there's anybody out there that suffers from insomnia, you can buy the CD or
Good
read
idea.
the court documents on this case, and you are cured.
We should publish them in a book, shouldn't we? That might make for interesting reading.
Sleepy time.
Now, at the beginning of today's show, Javier alluded to a tradition on Watchtower in Focus, which is to toast to the new year. I think we should combine our New Year toast with the news released days ago in the 2020 Service Year Report that for the first time in 42 years, the organization has registered a decline in the number of global average publishers of 0.6%. And if that's not something to toast to, I don't know what is. So, bottoms up, everyone. Come on, Mark. There we go.
Cheers.
Chink, chink.
Ching ching.
There we go.
There's cheers from Snoopy and Charlie Brown.
I'm
Just so
choosing
you know-
the coffee because it's 8:10 in the morning. It's
Okay.
a bit on the
Oh, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, Kim. I'm on the Doers $25 at Albertsons budget because I don't have 20 Mars money. So
Yeah.
You should start a religion.
This is quite a nice
Make it-
single malt that's been imported to Croatia. It was one of my Christmas presents.
Nice.
But yes, wow, what a piece of news to end the year with. A late stocking filler there. And it's difficult to understate the significance of this because we started off, didn't we, talking about the impact of COVID. And it's perhaps difficult, as I mentioned in my video on the subject, it's difficult to parse the impact of COVID versus what we've already witnessed in terms of the impact of the internet in trying to figure out what's actually caused this. It may well end up being a combination of factors, with COVID playing at least some part, given the fact that 24 of the 70 large countries that saw a decline in publishers were in Africa. And although I've had comments from people who live in Africa saying, what are you talking about? We have internet. And I understand that. But broadly speaking, on the continent of Africa, it's going to be harder, isn't it? When the meetings switch over to Zoom, and Zoom is your way of worshipping as a Jehovah's Witness, and you have entire communities where it's difficult for people to get access to the internet, that's bound to have a knock-on effect. But it's not just in Africa where we've seen the decreases. Half of Europe is in decline. New Zealand is in decline. A number of countries in Central America are in decline. Japan is in decline. I listed all of these on my video. Pakistan, I think. So, this is a global phenomenon, and it will be very interesting to see what happens next year. I'm not writing off the numbers recovering slightly. But whatever happens, I think, the trend is downwards. This is an organization that simply wasn't built for the internet age and for an age in which critical information is freely available.
I think, we're not going to know what the full effect of this, the whole COVID and the lockdowns and all that stuff is going to be for maybe another year or two. But I have to think that there has to be something to that whole, unplugging from the matrix effect kind of thing where all you have are the Zoom meetings and they're not participating in the door-to-door ministry. And I'm sorry, but I when people unplug when they've had some kind of break from the activity and everything that's required of rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses to do every day, that's when people wake up. It's when they've had an opportunity to get a break from that. I can only imagine, people who are working 40 hours a week, they're pioneering, they're participating in preparing for the meetings, or the men are teaching from the stage, preparing talks and all that stuff. I can only imagine what it's like to have. I can't just imagine. I know what it's like to have a break from all that stuff. And
look at what Lloyd's putting up on the screen,
and to think about things, and that has to have an impact on like, maybe the numbers dipped now as a result of this, but I think even if there is a recovery, it may not come from people going back. They may have lost those people altogether, and it might come from new adherents or something like that. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but I have to account for that unplugging having some kind of factor in all these numbers.
Well, look at what they're doing with the reduced hour requirements now, or what I should say is a reduced reporting requirements. So it's very clear because they've released a body of elder letters to all congregations in various countries, and the thrust of this new announcement is that if you are a publisher who is, not able to get out into the field ministry like you would like to do because of the coronavirus, they're basically saying, hey, look, they don't want to lose publisher numbers. So they're saying, if you want to turn in time and it's under an hour, just tell us that you have time. I forget the exact wording of the document, but they've announced that you can do this now. Look at all these people. I just left 3 months ago. This is significant, and people are waking up. I've had a lot of people reach out to me personally for that saw the Witnesses documentary that Lloyd was a part of, and that, they said, hey, I woke up because of the Witnesses documentary by Trey Bundy. This is, in fact, I sent him that message as soon as I got it, and it made him feel really good that he's having a positive impact on someone's life. But when you are unplugging from the matrix, like Javier said, and you're reducing the amount of time that you're spending in this ministry, and then you're forced to, your only form of ministry is making phone calls and writing letters, that really takes its toll. People are kind of getting tired of just, their form letters. It's the same thing over and over again. You can only do so much of it. And I know they're meeting together in Zoom groups and having little meetings where they're doing letter writing, how that benefits, the group. I guess it's a camaraderie thing that they're all in the same boat. But what Javier said is absolutely correct, that the unplugging from the matrix or reducing your connections to the matrix is having that knock-on effect, that trickle-down effect. And I think we're going to probably see that continue well through 2021. I certainly hope so.
Amanda, they're saying there have been a number of newly awoken people in the chat today.
That is great.
I'm frankly noticing more increased activity, shall we say, on my channel, especially in the last couple of months. Yeah.
There was one there that said, that they'd been out for 1 week. I'm like, wow, good on you. Like, welcome to freedom. It's the best. And yes, godly beard, knowledge is power. And also, I did appreciate your time fractions comment.
So what a great way to end our show. What a fascinating year 2020 has been. We've been here on Watchtower in Focus, keeping an eye on things. We intend to do the same in 2021. All that remains is to thank everyone. There's currently 575 tuned in. This has been a really well-attended live stream.
I want to know who's drinking. So
who's drinking? I'm still.
If you've got a shot, I post it on the chat. I want to know who served up some good drinking.
Yeah,
because
the whole bunker.
I don't feel so bad for drinking in the middle of the day.
Well, the whole bunker stinks of this whiskey. I can tell you that much. But I just have one final announcement. This is the final Watchtower in Focus. But before you all start panicking, it's not the final show. We're just changing our name for reasons that will hopefully become obvious in the future, this show will henceforth be called JW Watch, and it will continue the same numbering of episodes. So there'll be no change in the numbering. We'll be able to refer to previous episodes, but hopefully, I don't want to divulge too much right at this moment. There are some quite interesting plans for the coming weeks and months, but it just made sense to change the name in harmony with those plans. So New Light here on the channel. Future shows will be called JW Watch, but we'll have the same faces.
You forgot the sponsored by Say Knives apricot scrubs.
Sponsored by St. Ives Apricot Scrub, or at least Javier's working on that sponsorship.
Scrappy.
Yeah, and Scrappy the cat. We'll still be here keeping an eye on the organisation. Thank you so much to the hundreds who've tuned in. We hope we've done this topic justice, and we'll be back in 2021. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And, as always, thank you for watching.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Cheers.
Say to the world I'd die if we were falling apart. Going to work, smiling as we're falling apart. You lie to your friends as fine as you're falling apart. Soon